The city never slept, and its sky was always dark with tall towers floating above the ground and neon lights, flashing like fake stars in the night above the noise of ships and voices in engines that never stopped. The black market moved like blood through the veins of this giant metal city, hidden in tunnels and secret doors and old warehouses, where no law reached and no one cared what was sold or bought inside. One such place, under a broken roof and blinking red light, an alien trader waited, with cold yellow eyes and long fingers tapping on a dirty table in front of him. Was a small cage made of old wires and scrap metal. Inside the cage, a girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her skin pale, her hair tangled, her eyes empty. She looked no older than 10, maybe younger. Her hands were tied, and her clothes were torn. The alien called her a failed product, a useless clone made in a lab and left to rot, but he had found someone to take her, a buyer who paid not with credits, but with a bag of rotten fruit, rare in this part of the galaxy and strangely valuable to certain species. The Pasmingfunda deal was quick and quiet. The buyer never spoke, his face hidden under a dark hood. He placed the fruit on the table, picked up the cage, and walked away. No one looked twice. No one asked questions in this part of the city. It was normal to sell things that looked human, even if they were not. But someone saw the trade, a human man standing in the corner holding a mop and a bucket. His name was Milo, and he worked there as a janitor. He cleaned the blood, the oil, the broken things. He was small and quiet, and most people forgot he was even there. But Milo saw everything, and what he saw tonight made his chest feel tight. The girl in the cage, her eyes met his for just a second, and in that second he saw something, not fear, not hate, not even pain, but something deeper, a question, maybe a cry he could not hear. He followed the buyer from a distance, careful to stay in the shadows, his feet silent, his breath slow. The buyer moved through the back alleys and into a tunnel that smelled like chemicals and rust, then entered a lab through a door with broken glass and blinking lights. Milo stopped and watched from a crack in the wall. The lab was full of machines, old and buzzing, half alive, half dead. The buyer placed the cage on a metal table and walked away into another room. The girl looked around but said nothing. Milo waited and then slowly moved closer. He wanted to see her face again. He wanted to understand why her eyes had looked so human, so full of something real. The cage was not locked, just held shut by a broken latch. He touched it, and the girl looked at him again, her eyes wide this time and shining. He whispered, "Are you okay?" And she did not answer. But then she whispered back with a voice dry like dust, "I remember Earth." Milo froze. No one talked about Earth, not anymore, not since it burned, not since the wars, not since humans became the weakest race in the stars. But this girl remembered Earth, and she was here in a cage, sold for rotten fruit like garbage, and something about that felt wrong. Buyer came back and Milo slipped away, heart racing, head full of noise. He could not sleep that night. He sat in his tiny room above a food stall, looking at the stars through a small window. He thought of her eyes, her voice, the word Earth. He asked around the next day, searched the city network, looked through old records and broken files. He found nothing about a girl like her, but he found something else, a rumor from years ago about a secret project called Lightburn, a human experiment to create a perfect mind, a child who could connect with machines, feel them, control them, even heal them. The project failed. They said the lab was destroyed, no survivors. But what if one did survive? What if she was that child, and now she was in the hands of a buyer who saw her as nothing but a tool, a spare part, a thing to sell again? Milo stood up and knew what he had to do. He had no weapons, no plan, but he had eyes that had seen too much, and a heart that still believed in something good. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm going back. I'm taking her out." And as the lights of the city blinked outside and the night got even darker, Milo walked back into the shadows, ready to steal something that no one else cared about, a little girl with broken clothes and big eyes who might just be the last light of Earth. The night was cold in the lower part of the city, where the walls leaked steam and the air smelled like burned wires and old metal. Milo sat on the edge of his broken bed, his hands shaking as he stared at the small device in front of him. The screen flickered weak. Blue light across his tired face showing lines of code and files. He was not supposed to see he had spent all day searching for her. The girl from the cage, the one with the voice that remembered. Earth, no name, no ID, no data, only fragments left behind, erased, cleaned like someone wanted her gone forever. But one word kept coming back through every dead file, every corrupted message: Lightbird. A word with no price but heavy with meaning. Milo had never heard it before, but his gut told him it was more than a name, more than a title. It was a truth hidden under lies and time. He replayed her voice again and again. I remember Earth. Those 3 words lived in his head louder than anything, louder than the machines outside, louder than the fear in his chest. He stood up, grabbed his coat and wrapped it around his thin frame. He opened a small drawer under the floor and pulled out a map made of plastic film. The lines were old and faded, but he traced the way back to the lab, the place where the buyer had taken her, the place where she was kept. He walked fast through the narrow streets, his footsteps soft on the wet ground. Lights above blinked in patterns, warning him to turn back, to stay out, to forget. But he did not stop. He passed broken doors, silent guards, strange creatures with eyes like glass, but no one noticed him. He was just a janitor, just another shadow in a city full of ghosts. The edge of the zone, he stopped near a fence covered in rust and black mold. Beyond it, the lab stood quiet and still like a sleeping beast. Milo waited and watched, counted the cameras, the guards, the way in and out. He knew he had no weapon, no backup, no plan, but he had something else. He had a reason. When the guards left for shift change, he moved to a broken vent and dropped into the lab's lower floor. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling. Sparks flew in small bursts. Machines clicked and hummed like they were dreaming. Saw her cage again, now placed near a giant console with screens showing graphs and scans. Her body scanned her brain, mapped her thoughts, turned into lines of data. The buyer stood near the console talking to someone on a screen. Words like prototype, unstable value, low, floated through the air. The girl sat still, her arms around her knees, her eyes half open, but she was not sleeping. She was listening. She was waiting. Milo moved closer, hiding behind machines, his heart beating louder than the machines around him. He picked up a broken pipe, held it tight like a sword he had never fought before, never killed, never tried to be a hero, but tonight he would try. The buyer left the room for a moment, and Milo ran to the cage, his hands trembling. He lifted the latch and opened the door. She looked at him, eyes wide, not with fear, but with something else. She whispered again, "You came back," and he nodded and said quietly, "I could not leave you." He picked her up. She was lighter than he expected, her skin cold, her body weak, but her eyes bright, full of questions, full of life. They ran through the same vent, crawling fast, her breath close to his ear, her hands gripping his coat from behind. Outside the lab, the night was darker and colder than before, but they kept moving through alleys and side streets until they reached a place Milo knew well, a hidden door under an old food stall where the owner owed Milo a favor. He opened it and let them in, gave them a blanket, a little food, and closed the door behind them without a word. Milo sat with the girl by the heater, watching her eat small bites like she had not eaten in days. Her name, he asked, and she paused, then said softly, "Aya." He repeated it, Aya, like a song, like a promise, as she smiled for the first time. "Just a little, just enough." He asked her what she remembered, and she said, "Fire and wires and voices and one man who called her daughter before he died." She said the machines talked to her sometimes, whispered things only she could hear. Milo knew then she was not just a girl, not just a lost child. She was something more, something dangerous, maybe something beautiful, but now she was his responsibility. He looked at her and said, "You are not broken, you are not a clone, and I do not care what they say, you are worth more than all of them." And she looked back at him and said, "I believe." Youth heater buzzed quietly, the city screamed outside, but inside the room, a small light began to grow, not from the heater, not from the walls, but from her, from Aya, her skin glowing soft like starlight, like hope, like something the world had forgotten. And Milo sat there watching her shine, not knowing what would come next, not knowing the danger that would soon arrive, but knowing one thing with all his heart: he would protect her no matter what. The room was quiet, But the silence was heavy with fear, and the shadows on the walls moved like slow waves as the small heater buzzed low and weak. Aya sat close to Milo, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm liquid, her eyes fixed on the floor. Like she was trying to see something far away, something deep inside her memory, something lost. Milo kept watching her, not with fear, not with doubt, but with something gentler, something like hope, though he did not know why. He only knew that something inside this girl was different, not just the light that came from her skin, not just the way she spoke, but the weight in her voice. The way she said words like they mattered, like they carried pieces of a truth too big to understand. She looked up. Suddenly, her face pale, her lips shaking, and she whispered, "They are coming." Milo jumped to his feet, moved to the door, and listened. He heard it too, a low whine, a sound like metal crying, then footsteps fast and sharp and heavy. "They found us," he said. But not with panic, with something colder, more focused. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to the back of the room, where an old trapdoor waited. He had never used it, never thought he would, but now he opened it and helped her climb down into the narrow tunnel that smelled like wet stone and old rust. He followed and closed the door above them, just as the front door crashed open and the heater exploded in a flash of sparks. They moved through the tunnel fast, even though Aya's legs were weak and her breath short. She never let go of his hand, never asked where they were going, never said she was afraid. Milo guided her through turns and drops, through pipes and darkness, through forgotten pathways made long ago by people who had nothing and needed ways to disappear. They reached an old exit near the edge of the city, where the buildings bent like dying trees and the sky was full of smoke. Aya fell to her knees, her body shaking. Milo knelt beside her and touched her shoulder, asking if she was hurt, and she shook her head and said, "It is the voices, they are too loud." She held her head in her hands and whispered words that did not sound like any language Milo knew, but the ground under them began to pulse, faint blue light rising through the cracks like the earth itself was listening to her. Milo looked around, afraid someone might see it, but the street was empty and the light faded as fast as it came. Aya looked at him, eyes wide with fear, but also with something stronger. "I am not normal," she said, and he replied softly, "I know." She told him more now as they walked through the ruins of an old station. She remembered men in white coats calling her by numbers and codes, not a name, but sometimes one of them called her Little Light. He was the only one who smiled, the only one who said she could save them all before the fire came, before the doors exploded, before everything turned red. She said she heard the machines crying when they died, and now she still hears them even when they are silent, even when they are broken. Milo listened, not with disbelief, but with quiet understanding. He had seen too many strange things in this galaxy to be surprised anymore. But this girl, this Aya, she was something else, not a weapon, not a machine, not a clone. She was alive in a way he had never seen before. They reached an abandoned station where old trains used to run before the power died. Milo helped her inside an old car and sat her down. He found a bottle of water and an old blanket and wrapped her in it. She closed her eyes for a moment, and he watched her chest rise and fall, slow and soft. Then he turned to the small panel on the wall, pulled off the cover, and started connecting wires. He had once worked as a repair tech before cleaning floors, before losing his papers. He remembered enough to bring weak power to the lights, just enough to keep the cold away. Aya opened her eyes and smiled, small and tired, and asked, "Why are you helping me?" And Milo sat beside her and said, "Because someone once helped me when I was nothing, and I promised if I ever had the chance I would do the same for someone else." She looked at him then, not like a child looks at a man, but like a star looks at the dark sky, full of questions, full of quiet trust. Milo knew they could not stay long. They were still being hunted. The buyer would not stop. And now maybe others would come too, others who wanted what she could do, others who saw her as a tool, a key, a prize. But he also knew this was just the beginning. He looked at her and said, "Aya, we have to leave this planet. We have to find someone who can protect you, who can explain what you are." And she replied softly, "I do not want to be a thing again. I want to be me." And Milo promised her then, with his voice low and steady, that he would never let anyone turn her into anything but herself ever again outside. The wind howled through the broken steel of the old train, but inside one human and one strange girl sat side by side, not safe, not ready, but not alone anymore. The city had many eyes, some built into the walls, some flying through the sky, and some hidden in the faces of people who watched for money and moved for power. The black market was not just a place, it was mind, a voice that whispered through wires and screens and smoke, and it now spoke one name again and again. Aya. Her face now floated on bounty boards across 100 sectors marked as stolen property, marked as unstable asset, marked as high value. Alive, only a few had seen her, but every hunter now wanted to be the one who found her, because the price was more than credits, it was reputation, power, favor. Milo did not know how far the word had spread until he saw her face on a cracked display. Near a fuel station in the outer ring, the screen flickered with her image beside a cold robotic voice, stating wanted status, reward, unlimited condition. Alive, risk level unknown. Aya stood beside him silent, her hood pulled low over her glowing eyes. Her small hands tucked inside the coat she wore. She looked like a normal child until she moved, until she looked at the machine, and it blinked and died without her touching it. We cannot stay here, Milo whispered, even though he knew she already knew. They took shelter in a forgotten corner of the city, deep under a collapsed bridge where rusted walls kept out the cold, but not the fear. Milo tried to sleep, but his mind kept spinning, kept hearing the metal feet, the alarm sounds, the drones in the sky. He looked at Aya and saw her curled under a blanket, not crying, not shaking, just waiting, like someone who had already lived through worse. He remembered what she told him about light burn, about the voices in her head, the machines that listened to her, the scientists who called her the last hope and the last mistake. He had not told her yet that he believed she was more than a project, more than a creation. He had not told her that he thought, maybe, just maybe, she could change everything. Next day, a noise came that did not belong. Footsteps, too heavy, voices too smooth. Something was coming, something fast. Milo grabbed her hand and they ran through an old tunnel system, cold and dripping. Aya asked, "Where are we going?" And he said, "Somewhere. They will not find us," but he was wrong. A shadow moved ahead of them, fast and sharp and full of metal. A bounty hunter stepped out of the dark, his face half machine, his eyes like red knives. He raised his hand and said, "Give her to me, and you will live." Milo stepped in front of Aya with no weapon, no shield, just his body, his voice shaking but firm, and said, "No." The bounty hunter moved quick, a spark in the air. A shockwave rushed toward them, and in that moment, Aya screamed, not a loud scream, but a sharp, deep pulse, like a wave of sound and energy that spread out and broke every light, every screen, every sensor around them. The tunnel shook, and the hunter fell to one knee. Sparks flying from his chest. Stood tall, now her hands glowing, her eyes bright and full of light. She said, "Do not touch him," and the hunter stopped, frozen for a second, like he had seen something he did not understand. Then he pulled back and vanished into the shadows, saying, "This is not over." Milo and Aya kept moving until they reached a hidden place where humans still lived, where the city had forgotten to look. A small underground camp made of old train cars and scrap metal, guarded by people with hard eyes and heavy hearts. Milo begged them to let them stay, just for one night, just until the sky calmed and the signals faded. The leader, an old woman with a metal arm, looked at Aya and asked, "What is she?" And Aya looked back and said, "I do not know yet." They gave them a place to rest, gave them food, gave them silence, but the people kept looking at Aya like she was not one of them, like she might be the reason the sky would burn again. Milo saw it too, the way they stood back, the way they whispered. He knew this could not last. They would have to move again. Soon that night, Aya sat beside a broken screen and touched it with one finger, and it turned on even though it had no power, and showed stars spinning and planets moving, and a small blue light blinking far away. She turned to Milo and said, "I think something is calling me." And he asked, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I do not know, but it feels like home." Milo watched her, watched the way she spoke, the way the machines obeyed her, without fear, without code, and he wondered if maybe she was more than human, more than machine. Maybe she was something new. He promised her again that he would protect her even if the whole galaxy came for her. He would not run. He would not trade her. He would not let her be broken again. And she looked at him with those strange glowing eyes and said, "Then I will protect you too outside." The wind moved like a whisper through broken steel and lost dreams. But inside a new kind of power was waking. Not born in fire, not made in war, but growing in the heart of a girl who was never supposed to matter. The stars above the ruined city did not shine like they once did now. They flickered like dying lights behind smoke and satellites and cold metal clouds, but somewhere far beyond the mess and noise, one signal pulsed again and again, slow and steady, like a heartbeat calling across the galaxy, and Aya felt it deep inside her chest like a memory she had never lived. She sat still with her back against a broken wall, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes closed, but her mind open. The machines around her, old and dead for years, began to stir, wires humming softly, screens flashing, lines of forgotten code. Milo stood nearby watching, not afraid, but stunned. He had seen her glow before, seen her speak to metal with no words, seen her stop Hunter with a scream. But this was different. This was not defense. This was something new, something reaching out. Aya opened her eyes slowly, her breath heavy, and said, "I can hear them now, not just the machines, but the things behind them, something waiting in the dark, something older than the war, older than the stars." Milo knelt beside her, asked if she was in pain, but she shook her head and said, "No. I think I was made for this." The people in the camp grew quiet around her. They no longer spoke to Milo. They only stared at Aya like she was a storm in the shape of a child. They had lived through invasions and fire and hunger, but this was not fear of danger. This was fear of change. Milo knew it was time to leave before fear turned to betrayal, before someone made a mistake. He gathered what little they had, a map, some tools, a small box of food, and took Aya by the hand again. They walked through silence, through ash and shadow and steel. Aya looked stronger now, her steps firmer, her eyes clearer. But the light that came from her skin no longer flickered. It flowed like a river, moving with her breath, with her thoughts, with her will. They reached the edge of the city where ships no longer flew, where junk was piled high like graves of forgotten dreams. Milo had once worked here long ago, when he still had hope, still believed in something better. He found the old repair bay where he used to sleep, beside broken engines and leaking fuel lines. He showed Aya the shell of a small flight pod, crushed and useless to anyone. But she stepped inside, placed her hand on the console, and closed her eyes. The metal groaned, the lights blinked, and the core deep inside the wreck began to beat again. Milo stepped back in awe. The ship was not repaired, it was reborn. Aya turned to him and said, "I did not fix it. I woke it. It remembers me." They worked through the night, loading supplies, testing systems. The pod was not fast, not strong, but it could fly. And that was enough. Milo asked her if she knew where to go, and she said, "I think so. The signal is guiding me. But it is not a trap. It is something kind, something like family." Trusted her more than he trusted any map, more than any plan. And so they flew low through the air, under the scanners, under the guns, through broken clouds and shattered towers. But the black market never slept, and its eyes were many. The buyer who had lost her once had doubled the bounty. Now full armies searched, not just for her, but for Milo too, labeled as traitor, as thief, as human rebel. One ship spotted them, a fast hunter drone, sleek and black and deadly. It fired without warning, and the sky exploded around them. Aya closed her eyes and reached out, and the fire stopped in the air, froze and vanished like a dream, and the drone fell silent, dropped like a stone, as if its will had been broken. Milo stared at her, unable to speak, and she looked at him with a calm face and said, "I am not afraid anymore." They landed on a quiet moon covered in snow and ice, where the stars were clear and close, and the signal was loud. They followed it to a cave lit by machines that had not worked in years, but turned on as Aya stepped close. Inside, the walls were covered with symbols and light lines that looked like circuits and roots. At the same time, and in the center, was a seat not made for power, but for rest. Aya walked toward it, slowly, like she had been here before. Like this was where she had been born, not in flesh, not in time, but in purpose. She sat in the machines around Her began to speak not in sound, but in color and energy and memory. Milo watched as the cave lit up, as the snow outside melted, just a little as the sky above flickered with something like hope. He knew then she was not made to be sold, not built to be used, not meant to be forgotten. She was light-born not by hands, but by need, and now the galaxy would remember. Asterisk. The cold wind screamed across the frozen moon, but the cave was warm with soft lights that danced across the walls like living stories. Milo stood near the entrance, his eyes on the sky where small red dots moved like angry insects, closer with each breath. He had seen that pattern before, and he knew what it meant. They had been found. Aya sat still in the center of the old chamber, her body calm, her hands resting on her knees. Her light, soft and steady machines around her moved and hummed, not with fear, not with urgency, but with purpose, as if they understood what she was. Milo stepped closer and whispered, "They are coming," and she opened her eyes, slow and glowing, and said, "I know." She stood, and the machines lowered into the floor, vanishing like waves in sand. The walls grew dark, and the energy in the air pulled back like a deep breath held for too long. Milo grabbed the bag of supplies, slung it over his shoulder, and reached out his hand, and she took it with no fear in her grip. Just trust. They walked fast through the snow toward the flight pod, now warmed by her presence, ready again to fly through the stars. As the engines roared to life, the red dots in the sky grew larger. 3 hunter ships with black wings and silver teeth, sent by the black market, sent by fear, sent to bring her back. Milo pushed the ship into the sky, sharp and fast, dodging the first wave of plasma fire as the ice below shattered into glass. Aya sat beside him, her fingers touching the console, and the ship responded like it knew her voice. The metal bending, the thrusters burning brighter. They flew through the thin clouds and into the open dark, chased by 3 shadows that would not stop. Milo shouted, "We cannot outrun them," and Aya looked at him and said, "We do not have to." She closed her eyes and leaned back, her hands resting on her chest, her mind diving deep into the ship and deeper still into the space around them. The stars bent slightly, the metal groaned, and something changed. The first hunter ship lost control and spun off into the void, its systems blind, its engines cold. The second fired a net of energy, meant to trap, but the net broke apart before it touched them. Aya whispered something no one else could hear, and the net became dust. Only one remained, faster, smarter, older than the rest, flown by the bounty hunter who had seen her before, who had felt her scream, who had sworn to bring her in. He spoke through the channel, his voice low and full of steel, and said, "This ends. Now, child, your kind do not belong. Your power is not yours." And Aya replied, "My power is not yours either." They danced through spaceship against ship, mind against mind, speed against light. The bounty hunter launched a swarm of nanomines, sharp and silent, but Aya reached out and turned them away, without touch, without sound. But the hunter was not finished. He activated a black pulse, a wave of silence that stopped all energy, all light, all thought for a breath, and in that breath their ship fell. Milo tried to restart the systems, but nothing responded, and for the first time, Aya looked afraid, not for herself, but for him. She held his hand and said, "I will fix this." And then her light grew brighter than ever before. It filled the ship, poured through the cracks, lit the stars outside, and pushed against the silence until it shattered, and the systems came back alive. And burning, their ship flew again with a cry like thunder, and the hunter tried one last time to stop them, but Aya looked at him through the screen, her eyes shining like twin stars, and said, "You will not take me. I am not yours. I am not anyone's tool." The hunter's ship stopped in space, not broken, not dead, just still, as if something inside it had understood something too big to fight. Milo flew away fast toward a small planet, hidden behind a blue moon, where the signal was calling them again. Stronger now, like a hand reaching out, as they landed on the green hills of that forgotten world. Milo looked at Aya and asked, "What is this place?" And she said, "I think this is where it all began." The air was warm, the ground soft, the sky clear. For the first time in weeks they stepped outside together, not as fugitives, not as cargo, not as hunted things, but as something new. Aya touched the earth, and the trees around them stirred. The wind moved through her hair, and the planet itself seemed awake. Up and in the sky behind them, the stars watched, and the chase was over. The wind moved gently over the hills, carrying the smell of soil and leaves, and something older, something almost forgotten. The sky above was wide and open. Painted with soft clouds and warm light, the air felt clean like the first breath after a long storm. Aya stood barefoot in the grass, her eyes closed, her hands spread at her sides, her body still, but the ground beneath her feet pulsed with life, with memory, with something more than roots and stone. Milo watched her from a short distance. His heart quiet, his mind heavy but calm. He had never seen her like this, not afraid, not running, not hiding, just standing like she belonged. This place was not on any map, not marked by any signal, not found by machines. It was a place remembered by the Earth itself, waiting for someone to return. And now she had. The planet was small and quiet, forgotten after the war, left to rest, left to die. But something deep beneath the surface still lived, something that had once been part of the old world, part of Earth, something that still called to her. Aya walked forward, slow and steady, the trees opening around her without sound, the sky growing brighter with each step she took. She reached a circle of ancient stone, half buried in moss and soil, and stood in the center. The ground responded with a soft hum, a sound like breath, like welcome. Milo stepped closer, unsure if he should speak, unsure if she was even still here in this moment. Her light grew slowly, rising from her skin, flowing through the cracks in the stones, touching the trees, the air, the sky above. She turned to him, her voice clear and steady, and said, "I remember now, not just pieces, not just dreams. I remember who I am and why I was made." She stepped back and sat on the largest stone, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes full of quiet fire. She said, "I was not born to destroy or to serve. I was born to awaken." Milo sat beside her, said nothing, just listened as the wind moved through the grass and the light around her danced in soft wave. She spoke of the scientists who built her, not with wires, but with dreams. They had not wanted a weapon, they had wanted a healer, someone who could speak to a broken world, someone who could bring balance back to what had been lost. They had failed, but not completely, because she had survived. Milo asked, "What will happen now?" And she looked at him with a soft smile and said, "Now we begin again." She placed her hand on the stone, and the light shot down into the earth, far below, into the old machines left sleeping for centuries, engines made not for war, but for growth, for rebuilding. Across the hills, small lights began to rise from the ground, tiny drones, shaped like seeds and leaves, waking up and lifting into the air, spreading across the planet. They carried data, soil, water, memory. They carried life. Aya stood, and her light faded back into her skin, her body tired but strong, her voice calm. She said, "The planet will heal now, not all at once, but slow and true." Milo looked at the sky, where no hunters flew, no signals chased them, and for the first time in years, he felt peace, real and full. They built a small home near the stone, simple and warm, with walls of living wood and light that grew from the ceiling. Aya spent her days walking the hills, speaking to the soil, helping the planet remember how to breathe again. Others began to come, not soldiers, not traders, but people who had heard the stories of the girl who turned machines into trees, who made the stars blink in rhythm, who stood in silence and made the world grow. Some feared her at first, but she smiled at them and spoke gently, and they listened. Milo kept the records, wrote the story as it unfolded, not as myth, not as legend, but as truth. He aged slowly, time moving gently on this place. And Aya did not age at all, not in the way others did. One day, many years later, he sat beside her under a tall tree, grown from a machine she had healed, and he asked her, "Are you still Aya?" And she looked at him with the same fire in her eyes and said, "I am always Aya, but I am also something more now." He smiled and closed his eyes for the last time, and she stayed beside him as the stars above blinked slowly, like they were watching, like they were waiting. And when he was gone, she rose and placed her hand over his heart and whispered, "Thank you." Then she walked back to the stone circle and sat in the center in the trees, leaned closer, and the sky grew wide, and the wind carried her voice across the world. They sold her for Rotten fruit on a black market where hope had no price but one. Humans saw her worth, one voice called her name, and because of that the world lived again.